Hello there, dear viewer, and welcome to Hackerjack. My name is Jakob. I'm your host, and you're watching a Hackerjack episode. And I've been making music again, and this time I didn't do it with one synth like I recently did. I did it with a lot of different synths. Yeah, the video is going to be focusing on MixBox by IK Multimedia. I've been using this throughout my entire production and even at the mastering stage.
When you feel that beat of taking everything.
Warning.
Now you're playing my game, 'cause I'm in your brain.
Accessing.
You cannot hide it all. I'll break that firewall. You tell me to stop, but I don't want to stop.
Now, before we get into anything, full disclosure, I want to thank IK Multimedia for sponsoring this video. And since this is the first time I actually have a company directly pay me to make a video on my channel here, I want to tell you, the viewer, how that deal was set up and why I took it. First of all, I'm allowed to say whatever I want. Secondly, they had two criterias only for me making this video. Number one, they wanted me to make music and use MixBox. And number two, they wanted me to explain making music with MixBox in a video. Nothing else is being controlled. I decide everything, and my opinions are my own. So Hackerjack is a track or a song that has been inspired by the music from the game Cyberpunk 2077. And that's really all I'm going to say about it. Now, the Hackerjack project started with me using Figure, and I just decided to go directly into Cubase's and start my production there.
I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you.
Now, there was this one thing that did worry me when I started this project, and that's the fact that, well, there's this one plugin that I use a lot for all of my productions, whether it's narrations or if it's music or anything like that. I always use Saturn by FabFilter. I love this plugin. It's a saturation device, distortion, you can build your own algorithms, and since I'm using that so heavily, I wanted to see if I could replace it with something inside MixBox. And there's this, and I'll be talking more about that, but this thing here, pure gold. All right, so a really quick introduction to MixBox. Now, this is a 500 series styled rack kind of deal, and the MixBox rack can hold up to 8 different types of effects, and you have a bunch to choose from. Reverbs, compressors, equalizers, delays, modulation effects, saturation, there's a lot. 71 modules up to date. Now, like I said, a rack can hold 8 of these different effects. However, the amount of racks you have available differs depending on if you're using MixBox as an AUV3 or if you're running it as a standalone unit. You see, when you're loading it as an AUV3, then you're basically getting a rack per instance of MixBox. However, when you're using it as a standalone unit, you have up to 8 racks. And on top of that, if you've got a sound interface connected to MixBox, then you can also route individual channels to each of the different racks. And you can also set them to run in either mono or stereo. Now, I used MixBox as an AUV3 throughout my project, and I never really dealt with the standalone mode. Now, I am going to be focusing on MixBox, but it would be weird if I didn't focus a little bit on the sound sources that I use to make the music here. Right, so the bass drum and hi-hats come from Figure. But the snare drum, on the other hand, is something I made myself. I tweaked this inside an app called Seek Beats. Now for the bass, I used Figure. And for leads, I used Microlog. Now this is a synthesizer built into Cubase 3, and it is really, really good. Some of the sounds I used were basically presets that I tweaked a little bit further, and then some of them I kind of made myself from scratch. Now for arpeggios, I'm using Pure Acid because Pure Acid is just perfect when you want to make sounds like this. Now, for all the sound effects inside my track, I used IVCS. This app, it's just a perfect synthesizer to get some really weird sounding stuff with. And then there is this one app that I use to make one sound in here, and that's Synth 1. Simply because of the microtonal, this thing here. Lastly, I had some computer vocals in there, like a computer voice speaking. Now, I did these with a text-to-speak app called Robot Talk, and it's a very rudimentary app. It does not even have a recording function. The way that I got the vocals from this app into Cubase was basically I did a screen recording.
Uploading. Accessing. Warning. Warning.
Over the years, I've learned to really listen to what I have in my mix, what I have in my track, what needs to be highlighted, what needs to be pushed back, what needs to be spread out. Simple things like that. And many times I've gotten away with just adding just a little bit of saturation onto my sounds. And for this track, where I needed everything to have an edge, the Saturator X always delivered. So it didn't matter if it was one of the leads or a pad. I just added a little bit of saturation using the pull-push tube type algorithm, and it just did the job.
How does it feel?
Warning.
Being powerless. Maybe now you understand, yeah?
Accessing.
I'm not a criminal. I'm just taking back. I'm a Hackerjack. I'm a Hackerjack.
Now, there were a few sounds that I really needed to work on a bit more in order to get them to fit into the mix and for some of them to stick out in the mix. And so there are 3 sounds we need to take a deeper look at. We're going to begin with the vocal ARP. So the first thing I knew I wanted was I wanted this sound to sound vocal-like. And the best way of doing that is with a formant filter. I had already gone through all of the filters inside MixBox here, and I knew about the formant filter. I love formant filters. I'm like drawn to them. Whenever I find one, I have to try it out. I popped that in there and it just worked. Now at this stage, it had a rhythm to it, it sounded vocal, but it didn't have the edge. It didn't have that punk edge. So I tried using the overdrive in this filter module. It didn't do it right. So what I did was I ended up adding the Flexi amp. Now, if we look at the settings inside this Flexi amp here, we can see that I've chosen the lead algorithm, and that is because none of the other ones had enough attitude. This one was the only one that did it right, because the lead type algorithm always just pushes everything to the max. And if we look further down, we can see that I've selected a single speaker cabinet, because all of the other ones, when I tried them out, they sounded too much rock and roll, and I really didn't want to have that. I wanted punk, not rock and roll. So the single 12-inch speaker was perfect. At the end, there is a hall reverb, and the funny thing is that if you listen to the mix and you listen for this sound, this vocal arp, you can hear that it sounds kind of dry. I wanted it to feel dry-like in the mix because I wanted it to kind of stick out because of that rhythmical pattern it has. It really enhances everything else, because when looking at the drum section, you can see that I'm using very little drums. There are no percussions. There's only hi-hat, snare, and bass, and there's really nothing else. This thing adds rhythm to my track. So the dryness really helps preserving that, but it sounded too dry without a hall reverb. I added that on, pulled back on some of the settings, and then it was just perfect. Bass is always important, at least to me. I mean, I make bass music most of the time. Well, if we go back in time and, you know, check out the bass in my previous cyberpunk track.
Are you ready for it?
Yeah, it's very much in your face, and the vocals are kind of taking the backseat. Mostly because it's not really, you know, telling you anything. They're just shouts, right? They're there to bring your attention to the track, basically. But when it comes to this track, working on this one, here I had lyrics, and bass is important, but I did not want it to have too much of an ego in the track. I still needed the vocals to kind of dominate a bit. I mean, I've probably mixed the bass a bit too high. I'm sure that a lot of mixing engineers or mastering engineers will tell me, Jakob, your mix sounds like dog shit, bro. To the last one who said something like that to me, I love you, bro, but my mix is the best thing since sliced bread. So what did I actually do with my bass? I needed it to sound punk. The way I made it sound punk was, again, I threw an amp on it. As soon as I threw on this thing, the American Vintage, I love this thing. I haven't really touched the dials much in this one. I did a few minor tweaks here, and as you can see, once again, our friend Saturator X is right here. And again, I'm using the push-pull tube type algorithm here because it just does the job exactly the way I want it. There's not much to say. This made the bass pop out a little bit. At the same time, it also made the bass take a step back in the mix and just flow into everything. I'm coming for you. So how could I fit this into my track? Well, the first thing I wanted to do was to cut off all the bottom. So I used the multi-filter in here. I just selected the high pass filter so that I could cut off all the bottom stuff. Next, I needed to make this sound punk. So I added an amp on there. And in the case of these vocals, it turned out that the lead algorithm, an algorithm that always pushes stuff to the max, you know, just makes stuff scream, was the one that worked the best. I needed the vocals to distort, but I still needed it to be, you got to make sure that you can hear the vowels and the consonants and, you know, so that you can really pick out the words because it's really easy to overdo it. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. As you can see here, I haven't really pulled up much on the gain. I'm just slightly driving it. Now I had something that sounded very punk, but I needed something to add a bit of ambience to it because it was very dry. The tape echo just proved to be perfect for this. It's a retro type device. It kind of distorts the sound, and it also has a very short delay. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. The tape echo is probably something I'm gonna throw on almost everything vocal-like that I produce in the future because of how it sounds. You actually have like 2 modes in here. You can run it in full mode or in filter mode. Try it out, seriously, try it out. Now at this point, I was very happy with my vocal sound. But as soon as I started playing it, I had that same problem with the vocals as I had with that vocal ARP thing, that it started sounding drier because of all of the other elements now mixing in together with it. So I did that same trick I did with the vocal ARP. I added plate reverb to it, and that took care of the problem. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. Now, after doing all of this mixing work, it was time to do the mastering. I'm not kidding myself. What I'm doing is maximizing, but I do try to do some stuff with equalization and, you know, some minor tweaks here and there. Well, in the case of this one, I also did cheat because I used a limiter that wasn't from MixBox. I used Fab Filter's L2 limiter simply because I know it so well, and I was reaching a deadline because I needed to have the track finished in time so that I had time enough to make this video. I could have used one of the limiters inside MixBox, but since I hadn't worked with them, I didn't really trust my own ability to learn them enough in order to do the job right of maximizing my track. This is why I chose the L2 limiter. But I did use effects for my mastering, and part of the chain was this MixBox rack right here. And once again, I've added the Saturation X module in here, and I've also added a British EQ. And the British EQ is only there to slightly enhance and decrease some stuff. I mean, if you look at the settings, you can see that the settings I've done they're pretty tiny. Just a little bit of bass pulled down around 400 Hertz. If we look at the low mid and high mid, these are such slight adjustments, but they did loads for my track. I also did a little bit of adjustment in the highs here, but yeah, as you can see, not much. The interesting thing here though is that if we go back to the Saturation X module and look at what algorithm I chose to use, you can see that I'm no longer using the pull-push tube type algorithm. I'm using the tape 2 algorithm. Why is that? That one does something with the bass. It's as if it's kind of like encasing it in spiky cotton. Exactly what I wanted. I'm coming for you. Something I definitely did not want to do for this one, something that I often do for most of my tracks. I didn't do any sidechaining, I didn't do any pumping for this track. I wanted it to be very free-flowing, no pumpy motion, nothing like that. These are legit signs, you know? This is how we talk to each other in Sweden when we talk to sound technicians. You walk up to them, you do this, they know you want the pump. Now, there is one drawback when working on iOS, and that is you're always limited by the hardware resources you have. And the older your iDevice is, the less resources you're going to have to work with, and you're going to have to bounce a lot of audio. And in this project, I had to do a lot of track freezing because I kept loading several instances of MixBox in here. And after a time, it got quite heavy and I had to freeze tracks. In the end, I ended up with about 24 tracks. And I also did record my audio in 48 kilohertz in 24 bits. So yeah, that's a lot of data for the iPad to shuffle around. By the way, it's an iPad Pro 11-inch from 2018. So it is very powerful, but it has a limit and you're gonna reach it when you build big projects. That's just the way it is. And it's good to have track freeze so that you can keep on working. I highly recommend MixBox, not only for the sheer amount of stuff that you have in there, but personally, I want to recommend it because I like this plugin. Everything in the filter section and everything in the amp section is just so good, okay? It's a good system. It's got a lot of quality modules in there, and anyone doing any mixes could definitely benefit from some MixBox magic in their toolbox. I'll put a link to the app down in the description, and a big shout out to all my viewers and followers, and also to people in the iOS music community who helped me in picking the album art for my track. Now, if you want to listen to or buy the full track, then you can do that over at my Bandcamp, which is where I prefer people listening to my music and also buying my music. But if you don't want to use Bandcamp, the track Hackerjack is also available on all major streaming platforms like Spotify and iTunes and many, many others. And I actually have a playlist where I'm collecting all of my cyberpunk-esque oriented content. So you can reach it through this link here or through the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching this video because I put a lot of work into this. I mean, I've been working on this project for about 3 weeks, a little bit more than 3 weeks, maybe 4. So yeah, it feels really good that you wanted to stay and watch the whole thing. If you liked the video, then thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, thumbs down. If you want to help me in any way, then you can share this video with anyone who might be interested in MixBox. And you can also comment down below and tell all of us reading in the comment section down there what you think about MixBox. Do you have MixBox? Maybe you don't have MixBox, but you're thinking about it. Maybe you got MixBox. What if you're not happy with MixBox? IK Multimedia will also be reading all the comments down there. So yeah, now if you want to help in a financial way, then I suggest buying my music, of course, but I've also got Patreon and PayPal if you're interested in that. And if you're not, then that's fine too. Now, as usual, did I hit the microphone? Let me do that again. Now, as usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it. Every bit of work that I did during the first half of the day, the first 5 hours, ended up not being usable because I had forgotten to turn on the sound interface. So I got a scuffed mix sound. I had to redo all of it, and I just did, and it feels great.